Have you ever wondered what would have happened if the Straw Hats were reborn already carrying the potential for Haki? Not earned over years of training, awakened from birth into a world with no idea what to do with power showing up this early. Potential isn't mastery though, and that gap is the whole story. Let's get into it. Let's start with Luffy, born with all three types hidden in him at once, a combination so rare even 𝗕𝗲𝗰 found no example of it in marine records. As a baby, his conqueror's Haki flared out randomly and dropped weaker-willed villagers around 𝗕𝗄𝐻 mid-conversation, word of the cursed infant who put grown men to sleep with a glance spread through East Blue trade routes before Luffy could even walk. Most sailors treated it as a joke over drinks, though a few marine clerks filed it away out of habit. Growing up under 𝗲𝗏, his observation let him sense Ace's punches a fraction early, though his armament stayed clumsy and untrained. More flicker than weapon. He'd still swallow the 𝗕𝗏𝗰 fruit out of curiosity. When the mountain bandit grabbed him, his conqueror's Haki spiked hard enough to drop half the bar. It still couldn't stop a blade though, and Shanks lost his arm pulling him from the sea monster. Regardless, Shanks warned him that untrained Haki was a liability, not a gift. He also quietly mentioned the boy's name to old marine contacts before leaving, so nobody in the Grand Line would mistake him for an easy target later. Luffy spent years hammering his armament against 𝗕𝗄𝐻's fence posts. By 17, he cracked 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐵's iron mace before even throwing a punch, and it made Kobe wonder what he'd just signed up for. Now, Zoro doesn't stay a small-town swordsman for long when he's born, with conquerors and armament potential stirring under the surface. Training at 𝗕𝗄𝐻's dojo, his natural armament let him absorb hits that should have cracked his ribs. It burned out fast though, and left him gasping between rounds. His conqueror's Haki leaked out mid-duel without him meaning to, dropping distracted students cold and draining him for the day. He and 𝗕𝗄𝐻 still made their promise, and their final duel still ended the same tragic way. No amount of raw, uncontrolled power changed a single step of it. Haki sharpens a swordsman. It doesn't repair a staircase. 𝗲𝗏𝗕𝗏𝗁𝗔 passed to him just as heavy as ever. Zoro cut through bounty hunters fast enough that East Blue underworld circles swapped stories about a kid with white eyes who dropped grown men without touching them, and more than one bounty office quietly logged his description. He'd wind up tied to a post in 𝐿𝐸𝐷𝑆town days before Luffy's arrival, having provoked Axe-Hand Morgan's men just to test how far he'd come. Luffy cut him loose, and the two compared notes on how strange it felt punching people twice their size and winning. Zoro admitted his Haki still slipped out of control when he got angry, draining him faster than a normal fight should. Luffy said his did the same, adding that Shanks once told him control mattered more than raw output. That conversation mattered more than either realized. Within a week, a marine outpost filed a report about 2 juvenile pirates radiating abnormal Haki signatures. It was the kind that usually got ignored, until 3 more just like it landed on the same desk, and a Cypher Paul clerk marked it as worth a second look. Nami's story runs differently too. Her observation let her feel Arlong's fleet coming from miles out, buying the village a few precious hours to hide its children. But Haki only warns you, it isn't an army. Arlong Park still went up on the coast, and Bellmare still stood between Arlong and her daughters when the moment came. Since no future sight turns a marine rifle back into a harmless one, Nami still smiled through 8 years of forced servitude while secretly saving every berry for Kokoyase's freedom. Her still clumsy observation was only sharp enough to catch Arlong's crew glancing her way a half-second early. When she joined Luffy and Zoro at Orangetown, she handled most of Buggy's crew solo, reading swings early enough to dodge them clean, though a few still clipped her since her control gave out fast. That left the 2 boys standing there in stunned silence until she pointed out that neither of them had a plan beyond hit it until it stops moving, a habit she'd spend the journey trying to break out of them. Syrup Village went mostly the same way, since Haki doesn't erase a scheduled betrayal, only the speed at which someone reacts to it. Usopp's raw observation was sharper than his training let him use, sensing wind shifts and enemy positions his slingshot couldn't always make use of in time. Kuro's plan to murder Kaya still went off on schedule, except Usopp felt the man's inhuman speed a half-second early, just enough to drag Kaya clear, even if Luffy landed the finishing blow. The 4 picked up the 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐴 and pointed it toward Baratie, Usopp already insisting he'd definitely could have handled it alone. At Baratie, Sanji's combined observation and armament had already made him a nightmare in his family's training halls, sensing a strike and trying to harden his leg fast enough to shatter it on impact. That meant Judge stopped seeing a disappointing third son and started seeing a weapon worth reclaiming. He quietly assigned 2 Germa agents to track him after he ran. None of that changed the wreck, the starvation, or the leg Zeff gave up keeping Sanji alive on that freezing rock. Haki was never going to create food out of a dying ocean. He and Zeff built Baratie together anyway, waiting years for a crew worth cooking for. When Don Krieg's fleet showed showed up, Zoro's Conqueror's Haki staggered Krieg's officers before it burned through his stamina and left him swaying on his feet. Sanji matched him kick for kick, since the two had turned every shared fight into an unspoken contest over whose control was improving faster. Mihawk arrived right after, felt the aftershock, and offered Zoro a duel. Zoro landed a few real hits thanks to his armament, but Mihawk read every flare of Haki like a book he'd already finished. And it wasn't close. Zoro walked away with a fresh scar, and a much clearer sense of how far he still had to climb, muttering that Sanji better not catch up while he was busy losing. In a smoky Loguetown bar that week, Smoker overheard enough gossip about the kid who dropped a whole fleet's morale without lifting a sword to file the name Straw Hat Luffy somewhere between curiosity and irritation. He passed that same rumor further up the chain than he realized. Before leaving the East Blue, the crew swung by Kokoyashi one last time. Nami stood at Belle-Mare's grave under the tangerine trees a little longer than she needed to, Nojiko beside her, neither saying much. Some things Haki was never built to fix. Only to remember correctly. Before we head into the Grand Line, hit like and subscribe if you're enjoying this one so far. It genuinely helps the channel more than you'd think. Now, with the East Blue behind them, every one of these four is already carrying more power than they know what to do with. The Straw Hats sail straight into a Grand Line that has no idea what's coming. Twin Capes welcomed them faster than usual once Crocus felt the pressure off Zoro and Luffy both. Vivi's identity got outed within minutes, since nobody in this crew had patience for secrets, though she agreed to come along the second she watched Zoro clear a stretch of bounty hunters on instinct alone. At Little Garden, Robin's sudden arrival as a lone Baroque works agent confused everyone, and her backstory explained why. Her armament, half-formed at 8 years old, let her survive the Ohara Buster call in a way her body never should have. She watched her mother and every scholar she knew die in that fire anyway. Hardened skin saves you from rubble, not from a government that's already decided to burn a library down. Saul held that library up long enough for her to run, before a Marine admiral froze him solid. Robin spent the next 20 years a wanted criminal with a bounty for the crime of being born, her Haki turning would-be captures into bad nights for Marine squads instead of clean ones. She kept working in secret through Alabasta, and only after Crocodile fell did she walk away from Baroque Works for good, joining the crew that had just beaten him. Something about this crew felt different. Nobody on this ship was waiting for a reason to hand her over. What worried her more was Marine ships changing course through islands this crew had already passed, like someone was mapping their path. Drum Island brought Chopper into the picture, his observation sharpening an instinct for danger nobody expected from a reindeer that young, though it did nothing for Dr. Hiluluk. Haki reads danger, not a disease already run its course. He fought Wapol's forces to a standstill with his heavy point regardless. At Alabasta, the crew tore through Baroque Works fast, and Crocodile's overconfidence nearly cost Luffy everything, since a Warlord's experience still counted for more than raw talent. It took Luffy eating 2 direct hits and nearly losing consciousness before his Haki-hardened fists landed clean, his Conqueror's Haki spiking so hard by the end, his arms shook for an hour after. Crocodile felt his own Logia edge erased for the first time in years, and finally admitted the kid hit like someone twice his age before the sand swallowed him whole. Nami watched Luffy walk into a warlord's territory like it was nothing and nearly pay for it. She snapped at him afterward that reckless didn't mean invincible, a lecture Luffy nodded through without absorbing a word of it. Word of a warlord going down reached a Cypher Paul Zero briefing within the week, and for the first time a name got attached to a growing file. Straw Hat Luffy, marked for reasons beyond a bounty. Skypiea barely slowed them down, Enel's lightning as useless against Luffy's rubber body as ever, though Zoro and Sanji burned through most of his priests before their control gave out and left them winded on the temple floor. Enel, moments before his own defeat, admitted with genuine fascination he'd never met a human whose sheer willpower alone could scramble his own observation the way Luffy's untrained conquered Haki did. Long Ring Long Land went easier. Zoro's Conqueror's Haki put half of Foxy's crew down before the Davy backfight's rules were even explained, though he slept a full day afterward to recover. At Water 7, Frankie's armament had already made him a local legend, a shipwright who shrugged off CP9 beatings like bad weather even when his control frayed and left him limping for days after. That single difference meant Spandam's agents never managed to steal the Pluton blueprints, and Iceberg never took a bullet meant to frame Robin for it. It cost CP9 dearly, though. 3 failed operations quietly buried by the world government. Tom still went to prison for a debt no Haki could undo, but Frankie walked away from Eni's lobby's shadow clean, joining the crew with the Sunny already built. The Florian Triangle brought them to Brook, whose observation had once let him sense the Rumbar pirates' final battle, coming a full day early. Though sensing a plague coming and stopping it from taking your entire crew are different things. He'd spent 50 years alone with that grief, his instincts sharp enough to survive Moria's shadow hunters for a very long time, never sharp enough to undo a death already done. The crew freed him without much much trouble, and for the first time in half a century, Brook laughed a real laugh, admitting that being strong enough to survive alone had never once felt like this. 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐢𝐵 hit them harder than anything before it. A pacifista cyborg matched Luffy, blow for blow, while a celestial dragon's overconfidence met his conqueror's Haki and dropped the noble cold. A marine admiral arriving late for the fight noted, unbothered, that raw talent without control only carried a person so far against him. 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗁𝐿 stepped between the crew and the fleet, closing in behind that admiral, silently apologizing to each Straw Hat before his 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐢𝐵𝐁𝐻 scattered them across the Grand Line's back half to keep them alive. Luffy alone got launched into Amazon Lily's waters. It was there, half drowned and grieving a crew he assumed he'd lost. That word reached him through Hancock's network that his brother sat waiting on death row in 𝗕𝗄𝐿. What followed wasn't a fight Haki could soften. Luffy broke into 𝗕𝗄𝐿 on nothing but stubbornness, clawing through 6 levels of the world's worst prison with Ivankov's help and a conqueror's Haki that kept slipping out of control exactly when he needed it steadiest. He reached Marineford in time to watch it anyway. Every ounce of raw 𝐜𝐤𝐤𝐽𝐻 Haki in that plaza couldn't rewrite an execution the government had already decided weeks earlier. Luffy's fist never made it through 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐢𝐵𝐁 magma before it met Ace's chest instead. Whitebeard fell not long after, and Shanks arrived just late enough to stop the war from swallowing everyone still standing. Luffy spent the following weeks on Amazon Lily doing nothing but screaming until his uncontrolled 𝐜𝐤𝐤𝐽𝐻 Haki flattened the jungle for a mile around him, and it still didn't bring anyone back. It taught him something no training ever could. Raw power decides fights, not outcomes already written. The rest of the crew, scattered across their own islands, learned the same lesson quietly, each spending those weeks turning hidden talent into something they could hold on to. They found their way back to Sabaody 2 years later, and the difference showed immediately. Bounty posters had aged into legend while they were gone. The reunion at the mangrove trees came with new scars and a quiet understanding that nobody's Haki was a party trick anymore. A Cypher Paul Zero report reached the 5 elders' desks, describing not one gifted pirate but an entire crew that had gone dark for 2 years and come back sharper. Monkey D. Dragon's network marked his son's crew as worth watching directly. Fishman Island welcomed them once they regrouped. Jinbei's Fishman Karate fused with mastered armament and observation, cornered Hody Jones, and exposed his dangerous plan before it could spread, the kingdom entering a decade of stability instead of the near-civil war it barely survived elsewhere. Nami's observation had sharpened into real future sight, reading pressure shifts well enough to call a coming storm before the island's own weather scholars caught it. That is exactly what convinced Jinbei. He wasn't looking at a strong crew anymore. He was looking at one capable of rewriting outcomes. He joined outright. Punk Hazard went fast, Chopper's battle sense picking Caesar Clown's poison gas triggers out of a crowded lab a step ahead, his antidote saving the children before the experiments finished. The crew crossed paths with Momonosuke and Trafalgar Law right on schedule, the alliance forming as it always had. Dressrosa still turned brutal. Trebol and Pika nearly burying half the crew under the Colosseum before Zoro's conquerors Haki cracked clean through Pika's stone body, though it left him unable to lift his swords for an hour. Usopp's observation carried the Tontada forest, reading Sugar's guards 2 seconds ahead and picking off targets Frankie's cola cannons couldn't reach. The sniper was finally living up to every boast he'd made. Robin's armament pinned Sugar down while Frankie's hardened frame ate a barrage that would have leveled a normal man. Once Luffy sprang back from Sugar's toy curse, his conqueror's Haki leveled half of Doflamingo's throne room, costing the crew a full day of recovery. Doflamingo watched his empire collapse to a crew this young and admitted on his way down that the world had stopped waiting for these kids to grow into their strength. This victory sent shockwaves worldwide, bounties nearly doubling, and for the first time Yonko-level ears started paying attention. After Zoo, the crew reached Whole Cake Island for Big Mom's Road Poneglyph. Sanji's observation, sharpened past anything his family beat into him, let him read a Charlotte ambush a room away and pull Pudding clear before her family used her. Zoro and Jinbei tore through the Sweet Commanders, while Luffy pushed deeper alone until Katakuri stood in his way. Katakuri's own observation matched Luffy hit for hit, and the two traded blows for hours, both running on fumes before Luffy's conqueror's Haki cracked his mochi armor for good in a nearly even fight. It left Katakuri smiling through a shattered lip about facing Haki that had genuinely outgrown his own. Big Mom herself proved a different problem. problem. It took every ounce of Conqueror's Haki left in Luffy's body just to buy Nami time to bribe Zeus into switching sides. Brook's observation locking onto Big Mom's soul-draining reach a half-second before it landed. His 50 years of listening to the dead finally worth something against a woman who fed on the living. In Wano, the Alliance chipped away at the 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗁 first, Zoro's Conqueror's Haki freezing entire squads until his knees buckled. Kaido's numbers still nearly broke the raid before Marco's Phoenix Flames covered the harbor at the last possible moment. Nami, watching from the Sunny's deck, realized she'd stopped being scared for Luffy years ago and started just being scared with him, which somehow felt worse. In the chaos, Luffy finally cornered Kaido, who paused just long enough to admit, almost admiringly, that he hadn't felt Conqueror's Haki this concentrated since Roger. Then something in Luffy finally answered. The grief of Marineford, years of 𝐿𝐥𝐤𝐢𝐬𝐵 Haki that had never once been fully his to control, fusing into Gear 5th for the first time. Kaido went down beneath it, not easily, not quickly, and Wano breathed free air for the first time in decades. Luffy was declared an Emperor of the Sea within the week, a title that landed heavier than it should have, since the only person he'd wanted to celebrate it with had been gone for years. In a room the public would never hear about, one of the 5 elders finally said what the reports had been circling for 2 decades. This had stopped being about one exceptional pirate long ago. What the world was facing was a full generation born already carrying what used to take a lifetime to earn. A crew that hadn't been powerful from the start so much as impossible to stop. An era arriving on a schedule nobody in 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐻 had chosen. Garp read his own copy of that report years after first hearing his grandson's name whispered as a cursed infant. He could only sigh and admit that some things were never going to stay small, and that Haki, for all its power, had never once saved the people who mattered most, only sharpened the ones left to keep going. Let me know in the comments which Straw Hat's Haki moment hit you the hardest. Drop a like if you enjoyed this one, subscribe for more One Piece what-ifs, and I'll catch you in the next one.